Hi everyone, welcome to my channel. In today's video, I am super excited to share with all of you a review of the Chikuhodo FO brush series. So if you guys have watched any of my recent videos, you know that I've been absolutely obsessed with their FO-4 brush. I picked this up last year when I took a trip to Japan, and I didn't really know what to expect with this brush. I mainly bought it because it was really beautiful, and this quickly rose to be one of my all-time favorite brushes, and in particular my favorite bronzer brush, which is saying a lot because I've always been on the hunt for the perfect bronzer brush. I have Sonia G's Niji Pro, Bronzer Pro, Face Pro, and a bunch of other top-of-the-line bronzer brushes, but this one kind of came out of nowhere and took the cake. And so after using this brush, I've been thinking a lot about this FO series and really wanting to buy more brushes from it just because this was so exceptional. And so at first I was going to wait until I go back to Japan at some point because I was like, well, you know, these brushes are really expensive. It's kind of hard to find them in the US. But then I finally caved and decided to go onto Fude Beauty's website and buy a bunch more of the brushes in the series. And so I picked up 6 more brushes. Yes, I kind of went ham because at first I was only going to pick up 1 or 2, but the shipping on Fude Beauty's website is kind of expensive. So I figured if I'm going to place an order, I should buy all of the ones that I want. So in today's video, I'm going to share with you guys my first impressions of these new brushes and my overall thoughts about this brush line. And I'll demo all the brushes on my face using all of my Japanese makeup products as well, since we're kind of keeping this in the Fude Japanese theme for today. So if you're interested in learning more about Chikuhodo's FO brush series, then just stick around. So let me first just run through the brushes I picked up. This is the FO-3 brush. It's for powder and blush and has a nice symmetrical shape and a very soft, wispy effect on the cheeks. Let's take a moment to just admire the beauty behind the craftsmanship of these brushes. They have a gorgeous light wood handle. You can see the grain of the wood. And then I love the ferrule. It's a really lovely muted green, and it says Chikuhodo on the front. And then the bristles themselves have just a really gorgeous multi-dimensional color to them. At the base, they are much lighter, and then as they taper outwards, they have a much deeper shade. Then we have the FO-4 brush. This is the one that I fell in love with first. This one has a really nice angle. It's a little bit more dense in comparison to the FO-3. Perfect for bronzer and blush, but you can also use it for powder. And in general, for this whole line, you can only use it for powder and not for liquid products. Next, we have the FO-6. This is a small eyeshadow brush. Then we have the FO-5 brush. This is supposed to be an eyeshadow brush, but as you'll see in today's video, I actually prefer it for other purposes. Next, we have the FO-7 brush, which is a pointy eyeshadow brush. Then we have the FO-8, a small smudger brush. And then the FO-10. This is a really uniquely shaped brush for eyeshadow. It has sort of a flat side and then this angle over here. It's supposed to mimic a finger application. And what makes this line so unique is that it's made out of silver fox hair, and I think it was the first Fude brush series to feature that kind of bristle type. Now, if you're like me, when you hear silver fox, you immediately ask, how do they get these sort of bristles? Like, how do they source that? Because, you know, with goat hair and such, we have a lot of domesticated goats, and you can just kind of clip off their hairs. And goat hair is also presumably a byproduct of the goat meat and dairy industries, but foxes are not a domesticated animal, and so this is something I was wondering about, and I tried my best to do research online to find out more information. I can't say there's like that many sources that I was able to find. Alicia Archer has a great video about the same Chikuhodo line where she goes into more depth based on her understanding from what the brand told her, and then there's also some posts people have made on forums online where they reached out to Chikuhodo and got some more information. Based on those sources, what I've gathered is that Chikuhodo considers their brushes to be cruelty-free by Japanese standards. And what that means is that no animal is killed specifically for the purpose of creating brushes. And so they do source these brushes from the fox fur industry. And so, as you know, a lot of brands put fox trim on their coats or, have entire coats made out of fur. So hair that is left over from that process is then purchased by Chikuhodo in order to make these brushes. So to be honest, this is something that I do feel a little bit mixed about. So I don't like coats that have fur, and I specifically avoid brands like Canada Goose that do have a lot of fur in their products. So I did feel a little bit torn when I was first considering whether to buy these brushes because, of course, even though they're only using the leftover hairs, they're still paying some money, presumably, to the fox hair industry. So that's something I don't really love, but at the same time, I do appreciate the fact that since these bristles would have been thrown away anyway, the fact that they bought them and used them to create this beautiful artisanal product that we can then enjoy is a positive on net. So I'm not going to say there's no ethical quandaries associated with this kind of bristle type. And I'm definitely not going to say, everyone needs to go out and buy these or anything. I think it really depends on every individual in terms of how they feel about these issues. For me personally, obviously the fact that I did buy these and I am making a video about them means that I came out on the side of I still think that it's worth it to me to buy these brushes. I think if the animals were specifically raised and killed in order to create brushes, I definitely wouldn't support that. But it's also the reality that there is a huge demand for the fur industry, and as long as that's the case, there is going to be byproducts and waste from that industry. And I'm glad that at least for now, those leftover products are being used to create something beautiful like this instead of just being wasted. So that's the context, and I think both positions are very reasonable in terms of whether you personally want or do not want to buy this sort of bristle type. So before we get into the brush demo, I'm going to go ahead and put my base on. So none of these brushes can be used with liquid products. So today I'm going to use this cute little sponge, which is shaped like a mushroom from Sephora for my complexion products. This comes in a little bundle of 2. That's how the mushroom looks like when it's not wetted, and it expands to this side when wetted. I got this for Christmas and it's super adorable, but I've never used it before, so we'll see how well it works. And for today's look, I'm going in with my Koh Gen Do Aqua foundation. I have this in shade 123. So I'm going to first just pump that on the back of my hand. You can see the texture of the product there. And then I'm going to just use the sponge to stamp that in. This is one of my current favorite foundations. It leaves a really beautiful, natural, glowy finish to the skin. In terms of this sponge, it works pretty well for large areas of your face, kind of like around the perimeter. It is a little bit cumbersome getting it into the corners. I guess you could maybe use one of these little parts, but it is very plush though. It's kind of fun to bounce it on your skin. For concealer, I'm going in with my Clé de Peau concealer. This is their reformulated version. I have this in the shade Ochre. And for this product, I like to just warm it up on my finger and then go in and dab it on my problem areas. This is my favorite concealer for covering up blemishes. It is nice under the eyes as well, but it's a little bit dry, and so I do find that most days for under eye, I prefer a liquid concealer. So I went off camera to do my brows, so now let's get into the brush demos. So for powder, I have my Koh Gen Do powder. This is my current favorite powder and the one that I picked up when I was in Japan. So I'm going in with that FO-3 brush into this. Just gonna pick up a little bit and then start dabbing that on the skin. Ooh, this is such a soft brush. It's very light and feathery on the skin. Wow. Ooh. I am really liking how this feels. Huh. I feel like this is the most angel soft brush I've ever felt for powder. It's so soft. Wow. Okay, so if you're someone who really doesn't like any bit of prickliness on your skin when you're applying powder, this brush is really a great one to look into. This is just so nice. You don't really feel the individual fibers that much. It really just kind of feels like a little soft patting motion on the face, as if it's just kind of one mass. Now this is a little bit big for the under eye area, but everywhere else on the face, it's a really good size if you have a smaller face like myself. Alrighty, so here we have the powder all over the face, and I have to say, this was a really great first impression. This is just such a soft brush. It's just so lovely. It feels amazing on the skin. I mean, I have a lot of squirrel hair brushes, a lot of goat hair brushes that are also super soft, but this was definitely next level in terms of softness. I mean, I really enjoyed the softness with the FO-4, but I feel like this one, because it's a little bit wispier, the hairs are also just a little bit longer, it just has that really delicate effect on the face. So far so good. So now let's get into bronzer. So I have here this bronzer from Romand, and I'm going to go in with the FO-4 brush and primarily just draw from this bottom part over here where it's more pigmented. This bronzer is extremely light, so as you can see, we're going to build it up, and I've also taken out my Victoria Beckham bronzer for some further definition. But let's first start with this one, which is a little bit cooler toned, a little bit more contour oriented. And what I find so unique about this FO-4 brush and why I fell in love with it so much is that it's just so easy to use for bronzer application. It provides such a seamless finish on the skin, like you don't see where the brush marks start or end. And it's just very soft on the skin as well, so it really doesn't disturb any of the product underneath. And for me, that's always a huge challenge with bronzer, because often, like over here for example, I do have a lot of acne scarring, so I do want to maintain as much coverage as possible. And a lot of bronzer brushes I find just kind of pick up any sort of complexion product I had underneath, but this one really doesn't. And it just lays the product down really nicely on top of all of those liquids and creams. So I'll also just get a little bit on the nose as well. This is a little bit big when it comes to the nose area, so I might actually go in with the FO-5 brush. Let's see how this goes for nose contour. Ooh, okay, actually this is a really good size and shape for nose contour. It's a little bit stiffer than what I usually go for this kind of use case, but the shape is really ideal for just kind of getting in there and just defining the bridge of your nose. Ooh, okay, very nice. So I do want a tiny bit more depth on my face, so I'm going to go in with this Victoria Beckham bronzer, which I have in shade 3, so it's a little bit deep for me. I'm going into the cooler tone shade and just going to apply this on top for just a little bit more depth. And for both this brush and the powder brush, what's so unique to me about this series is how it really doesn't feel like a brush that has a bunch of individual fibers. The bristles just all kind of cohere together in a really unique way, such that it just feels like you have sort of a single mass. I still haven't figured out the best way to describe this, because I feel like when I describe it, it doesn't sound like a good thing. But trust me when I say it's really nice having that sensation, because that just means it's not prickly at all. You don't really feel like there's these individual bristles kind of jabbing at you. Instead, it just really feels like this one singular soft mound that's just kind of tapping against your skin. So for blush today, I already know that the FO-4 brush is really nice for this, so I'm going to go in instead with the FO-3 brush, and I'm going to use my Suqqu blushes. This is now one of my all-time favorite blush formulas. I have one of their pure color blushes and also one of their melting powder blushes. I do prefer the melting powder formula, but I think today's dress is overall a little bit more cool toned, so I'm going to first go in with this pure color formula. This is more of the powder blush formulation. So let's see how this goes. Okay, I think this is doing a nice job. So because it's a wispier brush, it's sort of patting this on in a more sheer layer, but wow, that looks really nice. Okay, I'm quite pleased with how this is going on. The FO-4, because it's a little bit denser, tends to pick up a little bit more and applies the blush in a more targeted manner. This one definitely is a little bit wispier in terms of the application, but really, really beautiful, as you can see. Wow, this might just become one of my favorite blush brushes as well. Ooh. Okay, so far I am a huge fan of this FO-3. So glad I picked this up. So, so pretty. Just look at that. Ooh. Wow. That's such a seamless application. I mean, this blush formula is excellent as well, but I do feel like this is the most seamless application I've gotten from this, which is very impressive. Whew. Just out of curiosity though, I'm going to also go into a little bit of this melting powder blush and apply a tiny bit of that just kind of on the apples of the cheeks. Okay, yeah, this is going in really beautifully as well. Maybe take a little bit across the bridge of the nose. Really, really pretty. And I like how for this brush, you can either apply the product sort of head on like this and then tap it on like this, or you can apply it more at an angle. If you apply it at an angle like this, that's where it's really the softest and has that feeling of just like a soft kind of paw, just kind of gracing your hand. So now for the eyes, I'm gonna first go in with a little bit of my ABH Mini Eye Primer. This is my favorite eye primer. It's a bit light, but you can just use a tiny, tiny bit and it just makes the shadows apply really smoothly on the lids, doesn't make them sticky at all. And for eyeshadow today, I brought out my two Japanese eyeshadow palettes. So first I have this one from Suqqu. This is Yoiyukari. I feel like this color story will go really well with my outfit today. I also brought out my custom eyeshadow palette from Addiction Tokyo. This is sort of a more neutral purpley color story. Ooh, and actually, I forgot that I have this blush here. I feel like that would actually go super well with this dress. So I know we already have a lot of blush on the cheeks, but I'm gonna go back into that FO-3 brush, just take a little bit of that and just kind of add it to the party, because, ooh, yeah. This is a really pretty shade. And I'm kind of putting this a little bit higher on the cheeks, almost kind of where I would put highlight normally. This does have a little bit of that faint shimmer, but yeah, I'm liking how that looks. And I think this brush has done a really great job with all these three very different formulations as well. So without further ado, I'm going to bring you guys closer for the eyeshadow look. So first I'm going to go back into that FO-5 brush, since this is kind of the biggest, most wispy brush. And I'm going to go into this shade from Addiction. And I'm going to put this in the outer portion of the lids. Actually kind of going to sweep this all over. Okay, this brush is a little bit big. So it's a little bit different from the typical style that I use for eyeshadow. I typically like to go in with more of a crease brush that doesn't have quite as much width as this does. It feels a little bit big for my eyes. Yeah, not the hugest fan of how that applied. It might also be the shadow itself, so let me go into this shade as well. This is Shanghai Breakfast. It's a little bit lighter. Probably should have started with this one first. Let's see how that applies. I know this one should apply without any issue. Okay, yeah, this one's definitely applying better. But yeah, I think there's a little bit of a learning curve with this brush compared to what I normally use. It's just very thick. All right, yeah, I'm not a huge fan of how that applied my transition shade. I feel like it just didn't give me enough control in the way I would like. So that's a little bit unfortunate, but I did really like this for nose contour, so it's not a total bust. But yeah, maybe would not use it for the transition shade going forward. Probably stick more to my crease brushes. So moving right along, let's go in with the FO-10 brush, and I'm going to use that with this shade from the Suqqu palette. And this is a very interestingly shaped brush. I haven't used a brush that has quite this sort of slope to it. I don't know if you guys can see that. Just has a very interesting angle to it. But it's applying this shadow on really well. Interesting. Wow. Actually, I really like how this is applying. This shade is kind of a satin shimmer, and I feel like this brush is picking it up with a good amount of opacity. Ooh. All right. But it's also, I feel like you can also use this to kind of diffuse the shadow a little bit, because it's still thick enough that you can kind of use it to blend into the crease as well. This is looking more promising. Yeah, maybe I should have started with this brush instead. I think this is like the perfect one and done brush. If you just wanted to take one shadow and just kind of pat it on and then go like this and just zhuzh out the edges, then this brush kind of has you covered. So yeah, one and done lovers, definitely the FO-10 is really nice. I feel like this is really saving the look. And for some added depth, I'm also going to go into this shade and just concentrate this on the outer portion of the eyes. Again, I'm just very impressed with how pigmented these shadows look with this brush, because these shadows, for context, are not that pigmented. Suqqu has really light, kind of sheer layers for its formula, but this brush is really just picking it up super easily, and I feel like I don't have to dip in a lot to build up the pigmentation. I can just sort of pick up some shadow and just zhuzh it out on the lids, which is very nice. All right, let me give this original FO-5 brush another shot. I'm going to use this just to blend out the edges a bit. Okay, I feel like this brush, the FO-5, is good at, after you've kind of applied things, just sort of buffing out the edges. But yeah, I wouldn't recommend this for going in directly into the shadow, but it's doing a decent job of just smoothing out any edges. So now with the FO-6 brush, I'm going into this lighter shade, and I'm going to put this just all over the lids. This is a very sheer shade, so I'm not expecting a ton of payoff. But I feel like this brush is doing a pretty good job, actually. Usually it's like quite difficult for me to see this shade, but I think you can definitely see the color. I like how small this brush is as well, especially if you have smaller eyes like myself. This is really good for getting into that inner corner area. I feel like this would actually also be really excellent for the lower lash line. I mean, it does take a little bit longer to kind of build up pigment all over the lids if you're doing it like I am at the moment, but really nice for that precision. And actually, because I'm very curious, let's also go back in with that FO-10 brush and use that to pack on some of this shadow. Okay, yeah, I think actually it's probably best to go in first with a bigger brush like this and then use that smaller brush just to add a little bit more in the smaller portions of the eye. So now if I go in with that little brush, just add a little bit more. So yeah, this shadow is still a little bit more sheer than I would normally like, but that's generally been my experience with this palette. It's not really one where you're gonna get, you know, a really wham bam level of pigmentation. So to amp up this look a bit, I'm going into this glittery shade from the Addiction palette. This is very similar to Pat McGrath's Blitz Astral shades. So if you ever want to just buy a single Blitz Astral, you can buy these as singles from Addiction. As you can see, this adds a lot of sparkle to the look. It's much more kind of in your face than the rest of the eyeshadows that I'm using today. I'm probably going overboard applying this, but I just love this shade so much. Look how fun that is. Ooh. Just sparkle everywhere. And what makes this shade really remind me of the Blitz Astrals from Pat McGrath is you can still see a little bit of the shade below peeking through. So I really packed it on today, but you can also just have sort of a lighter layer of this, and then it'll just give you sort of that twinkling effect on the lids. All right, so now that all of this is on, I will say things are looking a little muddy, not really my favorite. I think, part of that's just from combining these two palettes, and part of it's that I wasn't super familiar with how these brushes work. So let me see if I can maybe build up some of the pigmentation again. So I'm going to go back into that Suqqu palette and go into this shade again. Really try to build it up. I'm using the FO-10. Okay, yeah, I like how that's looking. Again, I'm just so impressed with how this brush, even though it's kind of a chunky brush, is able to really pick up the shimmers and leave them quite vibrant on the lids. That's very impressive because this is not a vibrant palette. So usually I find with this palette, unless I am picking things up with a finger, it's a little bit hard to see the shadows. But I feel like this brush kind of mimics a finger application, which is very nice, very handy. Alrighty, I think that's probably the best we're gonna do in terms of really having much shine on the lids today, at least with these eyeshadows. So now let's get into the lower lash line. So I'm going to first go in with the FO-7 brush, and I'm going to use this in this shade over here. And wow, this is a very stiff brush, huh? Interesting. I don't know how I feel about that. Oh, wow, yeah, it's a little bit, it's so hard. I wonder if over time, if it'll get softer. I mean, on the one hand, if you want some real precision, I feel like this can definitely give it to you because the point is so stiff. But on the other hand, I'm not really liking this. It's like not that comfortable on the lids. I feel like it's making my eyes water a little bit. Yeah, not the best feeling. Okay, see, I'm not really sure about this one. Let me actually see, what if I use it instead kind of on the, this might be better for like a liner situation. So let's go into this, and what if I'm trying to use this to sort of draw a wing? Okay, yeah, it's much better for this kind of use case. Okay, so yeah, I was thinking of this more like the way I use my reference number 26. That's a jumbo pencil brush with a point, but that one's really soft. This one I think really is much more appropriate for if you really want that stiffness to kind of draw some liner on with some eyeshadow, then I think this will be your friend. But yeah, if you're wanting to use this in the lower lash line area, I would definitely not recommend that. Okay, so that gave a little bit of kind of a faux liner look, I guess. I feel like it made things look a little bit muddy again, but that's okay. Today is a very experimental look. Okay, so because that didn't quite work out for the lower lash line, I'm going to instead use the FO-6 brush. Again, going into this magenta shade, which is kind of the main shade I'm building this look off of. And okay, this definitely feels a lot better on the lower lash line area. Still not the softest ever, so I wouldn't say this brush is super special in comparison to some of the other brushes, but definitely better than that super spiky brush. Ooh, okay, that actually did a very good job. Ooh, very nice. Okay, so yeah, actually I do really like this for lower lash line. It has a nice stiffness that picks up a decent amount of shadow, but is still very soft on that lower lash line area. And then let's go in with this final brush, the FO-8 brush. And let's see, I guess I'll first just use this in this shade, see if we can get some pigment payoff. Okay, this one's also a little bit pointier than I would like. It is a very sharp brush. As you can see, it kind of really tapers. Yeah, not the biggest fan of how that's feeling either. Let's see, can this at least apply something like, maybe I'll take a little bit of this, see if it can deposit any of the sparkles just on that lower lash line area. Okay, I guess so. Yeah, again, I wonder if this one is better for kind of drawing on liner rather than going in with the lower lash line. So let me put it in this shade again and sort of use this just to finish off that liner on the top. Okay, yeah, I think this is a little bit better for this use case. I mean, it's still a little bit sharp, so as you can maybe see, it's drawing on a very precise line rather than maybe a more diffused line as I would typically prefer. Yeah, not really sure that I'm going to get a ton of use out of this brush, unfortunately. I'll keep playing around with it and let you guys know. Alrighty, so that is the completed eyeshadow look. In hindsight, I think I should have used a different palette because I do have a little bit of trouble with this Suqqu palette, and so I feel like using this with new brushes has made it a little bit harder for me to tell, you know, what is due to the brush versus what is due to this palette. And I think the result is, yeah, the eyeshadow's not looking that hot. This is definitely not a look I am particularly proud of. I'm actually wondering, maybe I should take off this eyeshadow look and start over again. Alrighty, so after some soul searching, I decided to just finish off this look. I mean, again, not my best eyeshadow application by any means, but I think putting eyeliner on sort of tied everything together. So now at least I'm not hating the look. So before we get into my overall thoughts about these brushes, let's do a few quick brush comparisons. So when I was buying brushes in Tokyo, I was actually comparing these two brushes because I wasn't sure if I wanted to get it in the Chikuhodo line or the Koyudo line. They are quite similar in size and shape, but I will say that the Chikuhodo is softer and wispier in comparison to the Koyudo. So I really like this Koyudo one for blush, but I think overall this Chikuhodo one is a better all-purpose brush, especially when it comes to all-over face powder. So the FO brush overall is definitely the most unique brush in today's haul, but in terms of overall size, it's quite similar to the worker brush. The main difference is that the Chikuhodo one has that tapered edge. The FO-5 looks most similar to the Jumbo worker that I have from Sonia G. It's a little bit longer haired and a little bit smaller, but I think these are both good for similar use cases. My favorite use case for the Jumbo worker is nose contour, and I think that'll be the same for this FO-5. And here is the FO-6 next to the GSN-9 from Chikuhodo. Very similar shape. I would say the Chikuhodo FO-6 is just a bit stiffer in comparison to the GSN-9. So whereas I like the GSN-9 for all over lid application and not so much for lower lash line work, I think the FO-6 is primarily good for lower lash line. And here it is next to the Hakuhodo brush that I recently got. This is the S138. The Hakuhodo one is a little bit smaller. I also really enjoy the Hakuhodo one for lower lash line work. And here's the FO-7 next to the Refer number 26. As you can see, they're very similar size and shape, but the Refer one is just way softer in comparison to the Chikuhodo one. So at the end of the day, I think they're actually very different use cases. And here's the FO-7 next to the Sonia G Detail brush from her Keyaki set. I thought these would be more similar since they have a very similar size and shape, but the FO-7 is just a lot pointier and stiffer. And here we have the FO-8 next to the Sonia G Smudger 1. These are quite similar, but the Chikuhodo is a lot thinner. And so I don't actually like the Smudger one, so I probably should have known not to get this Chikuhodo one. But both of them are just a little bit too pointy for me. Not really comfortable on the lash area. Here's the FO-8 next to the Sonia G Flat Definer brush. The FO-8 is a little bit thinner and a lot pointier, so even though I thought these would be quite similar, I'm not really sure that they can be used for the same use cases. So now for my overall thoughts about these brushes, and I have to say I'm kind of surprised. It's been a very polarizing initial impressions. So some of these brushes have like quickly shot up to be maybe like my all-time favorites for certain tasks, and then some of these other brushes I don't really know if I'm gonna really be able to get much use out of. So yeah, I mean, I don't think I'm gonna be able to return any of these. I'll have to double check Fude Beauty's return policy. Realistically, I'll probably just keep all of these for future comparison purposes. but let's run through this really fast. So first, as we already know, the FO-4 now is my holy grail bronzer brush. Absolutely love this. Every time I use this, I just fall in love with it more. So nothing has changed there. In terms of the FO-3, this one is also super amazing. Absolutely love this. I really think this could become my favorite powder brush and my favorite blush brush. So that's saying a lot. That's 2 use cases. This really excelled at both of them. So I'm extremely happy to have this in my collection. It's just incredibly, incredibly soft, yet really, really good at laying on the product. I didn't have any issues where I felt like I had to just keep on packing on the product or that it was hard to blend out. Everything just laid on really beautifully with no effort. Unfortunately for the FO-5, I can't say the same for this brush. I think this brush is mostly going to get relegated to nose contour, which is not that bad. I mean, I do nose contour most times when I do a full face of makeup, so I'll still, I think, get decent use out of this. I did not like this though as an eyeshadow brush. I think if you have much larger eyes than me or a much deeper socket, then this might work well. But at least for me, it just kind of made everything feel really muddy and messy in my crease area. So I am not a fan of how this performed there. I think this is good at kind of buffing out the edges. So if you want to maybe use this as a last step in your eyeshadow routine, then it could be good for that. But in terms of just the actual application itself, it just didn't give me enough control. For the FO-6, I did like this brush and I think I will get decent use out of this. I think this is great for both packing on shimmers and also for the lower lash line area. I would say this one's less special than, say, these 2 cheek brushes. These are like, you know, some of the best, really, really impressive. This one, I have a lot of other brushes in my collection that I really like for similar use cases. So I'm not sure that this is really going to become one of my all-time favorites, but is a really solid brush. For the FO-7, this is one I have to say I was quite disappointed with. I guess I just didn't really know what to expect. I really thought that this was going to be more like the Refer number 26, which I really enjoy but have been kind of trying to find a more luxe version of. That one just is really soft and beautiful for putting on lower lash line shadows. This is just way too stiff for that kind of use case. It just is so pointy. I think this is really good if you're someone who likes using shadow on the upper lash line to do that sort of, you know, faux liner effect. But I don't really do that a whole lot. So for me, I'm not really sure that I'm actually going to get much use out of this, which is a little disappointing, but good to know. And I guess if I ever do want to do that kind of faux liner thing, at least I have this in my collection. And then probably the brush I'll have the least use from is this FO-8 brush. I really don't know if I'm gonna be able to use this brush for anything, unfortunately. So yeah, definitely in hindsight should not have picked this one up. This might just be a me thing. I mean, I also don't like that smudger brush from Sonia G. So if you're someone who really likes those sorts of smudger brushes, this might be up your alley. For me though, it's just too thin and pointy, so it has a nice shape on this side, but the cross section is just so thin that I feel like, again, I can use this for maybe the upper lash line for some liner, just like really close to the lash line. But because it's so thin, it's just very pointy and a little bit more jabby than I would like. I mean, it's very soft. So if you like this kind of shape, this bristle fiber is super soft and comfortable. But I guess normally for me, I just like a little bit of a thicker brush, and so it doesn't have as much. And so it's just a little bit less harsh on the eye area. But I don't know, I'll keep trying this out. Maybe I can use this for a very precise application on the lower lash line. We'll see, but at the moment, not a huge fan of this brush. Finally, we have the FO-10, and this one has been a really surprise hit. I really didn't know what to expect with this kind of brush because I've never used anything with this shape, but I'm extremely impressed. I really like this brush. It is just really great for a wide variety of use cases. I think it is a very nice replacement for finger application when it comes to shimmers. I'll have to try this with some of my flakier formulas to see if it can pick up those. But definitely when it comes to more satin shimmers or maybe even metallic shimmers, I think this will be excellent for just placing the product down. And I typically go in with a finger for that sort of application, but I was extremely impressed with just how pigmented the shadows looked applied with this brush. And so I would highly recommend this one. And I think what's really cool about this one as well is because it's not your typical brush for shimmers, like this one, which is the Refer number 21, you can see this one is really flat in cross section. Because this one is much thicker, it makes this brush a little bit more like a hybrid. Like you can pack things on this way, but you can also sort of blend things out very easily. So I feel like this is absolutely perfect for one and done shadows. If you just want to pack something all over the lids and just blend out the edges, then this will be perfect. I'm not someone who normally uses that kind of application, but even for a look like today that included a lot of different shadows, I think this did an excellent job of just providing the precision that you need in order to put a bunch of different shadows on while still really blending everything nicely together. So on the whole, would highly recommend these brushes. So the 3, the 4, and the 10. I like the 6, but am not necessarily blown away by it. The 5 is nice for nose contour, but not really what I originally anticipated, which was eyeshadow. And then sadly, I don't really like the 7 or 8, at least based on today's impression. So that's it in terms of my overall thoughts about this brush collection. I would love to hear in the comments what you guys think about these brushes, and if you guys have other Fude brushes you would highly recommend, definitely let me know, because I've been in a bit of a makeup brush kick recently, collecting a lot of new brushes, and I definitely think this series is very special, so I'm really glad that I found it, even though all of the brushes didn't necessarily work out for me. And if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up, and if you haven't already, please subscribe to my channel. Thank you all so much for joining me today, and I'll catch you next time. Bye!